How should we define cancel culture? Well, first let's start with what it's not. If someone criticises you for something you've said or done, that's not cancel culture. That's free speech. If someone blocks you on Twitter, that's not cancel culture. Someone has merely decided you're not worth listening to and is exercising their freedom to ignore you. Your free speech is unaffected. What cancel culture actually means is a form of public shaming or harassment, usually driven by social media, often for relatively minor mistakes or unfashionable opinions. It's the difference between criticising someone for something they've said or done and systematically attempting to see their reputation and livelihood obliterated. It's not criticism, it's denunciation. It's contacting employers and demanding that people are fired because you don't agree with what they've said. It's spreading lies about people online so that they can never be employed again. In other words, it's a hugely disproportionate and vindictive response to something relatively minor. It's revenge, basically, but done in the name of virtue. But look at J.K. Rowling, people say. She hasn't been cancelled. Well, no, I mean, she's had to put up with a daily deluge of abuse and threats. But it's true, you can't cancel the world's most successful novelist. The vast majority of victims of cancel culture tend to be ordinary people who don't have the kind of financial resources or high-profile defenders to come to protect them from such campaigns. Cancel culture is about taking delight in someone else's fall. It is, as the singer Nick Cave described it, mercy's antithesis. Here's a good way to think about it. Let's say a colleague had attempted a joke via email and you feel a bit offended by it. Do you have a conversation with them in private and say, look, I think that was a bit misjudged, but I know that wasn't the intention, so let's just move on, maybe go for a pint or something? Or do you screenshot the email, post it online, invite all your followers to pile onto the person who wrote it and denounce them publicly, and then demand that the employer fires them for hateful conduct? Of these two options, if you're opting for the latter, you're not the good guy. But free speech has consequences, you say. Well, sure. I mean, I don't think anyone's ever denied that. If a person says something stupid or offensive, they can expect criticism, ridicule, counter-arguments, even protest. But if the consequences of free speech are that the person becomes the target of a campaign of public shaming and personal ruination, or worse still, that they're arrested for so-called hate speech, that's not right. So here are some of the cases you will have heard about in the media. There was that time when Nobel Prize-winning biochemist Tim Hunt was forced to resign from his honorary position at University College London after a journalist misrepresented jokes he had made at a conference. And you remember the time a journalist from the New Statesman interviewed the philosopher Roger Scruton and then deliberately misquoted him in order to make out that he was a racist? And then the journalist posed for a photograph online drinking champagne and gloating because his lies had led to Roger Scruton being dropped from his post as housing advisor to the government. What about the schoolteacher Christian Webb, who lost his job when it emerged that he had performed in viral comedy rap videos many years earlier under the pseudonym MC Devo? And then there's Nick Buckley, who founded a charity for underprivileged youths and was ousted for criticising the radical politics of the Black Lives Matter movement. And what about Jess Duvals, an artist who was targeted by campaigners for expressing an opinion that they just didn't like? They even managed to get the Royal Academy to stop selling her items in the gift shop until there was a backlash. And then there's Maya Forstater, who was dismissed by her employers for disagreeing with the government's proposed amendments to the Gender Recognition Act, a perfectly legitimate point of view that is, by the way, protected by law. And Lisa Keogh, a student who was investigated by her university for saying that women have vaginas. Or Neil Finn, who experienced a campaign of abuse, harassment and libel from students because he criticised the renaming of the David Hume Tower. And, of course, recently we've had the case of Kathleen Stock, who eventually felt compelled to quit from her post at Sussex University after she was targeted by activists who dressed up in masks, set off flares, put pressure on the university to have her fired and generally created an environment in which it was impossible to work. So the examples are endless. I've just mentioned a few of the many that have been publicised in the media over the past few years, but in truth, you won't ever hear about the majority of cases because most people's cancellations don't make the papers. Maybe they're not famous enough. Maybe their job isn't high profile enough. Maybe they don't have enough followers to amplify the case on social media. But it is happening all the time because there is a growing culture of intolerance for different viewpoints. If you don't believe me, you might want to talk to the Free Speech Union, who've helped countless people in precisely this situation. Or talk to Helen Pluckrose, who runs the organisation Counterweight, which was set up to help people who find themselves at risk of losing their jobs because they objected to the ideological demands of their employers. The practitioners of cancel culture will continue to lie. They'll say that cancel culture isn't real, why they carry on attempting to destroy people's lives. They'll say cancel culture is a phantom of the right-wing imagination, even though left-wing people seem to be just as affected, and the evidence for it is everywhere. They'll say they're the good guys, even though they lack basic compassion, empathy, and the capacity to forgive. They'll say that the only people they target are fascists and racists, those who are beyond the bounds of respectability, even though we can all see that the vast majority of their targets are decent people who are opposed to fascism and racism. And because these bullies think they're on the side of the angels, they'll do all this with a smile. Perhaps they should read The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, published in 1850 but set in Puritan New England in the mid-17th century. If they did, they would recognise themselves in the God-fearing community that Hawthorne so vividly portrays, gathered together in that marketplace to publicly shame Hester Prynne on the pillory steps. Those Puritans are no different from the activists of today who seek to cancel anyone who dares to challenge their worldview, who disguise their malice and lust for vengeance with public declarations of self-righteousness. And if these people really are on the right side of history, the future looks pretty bleak.